COPWATCH, policing the police every single day.
Charlotte County Sheriff Bill Prummell is Baker acting for profit. Analysis. Baker Act. Big hole in the system. By John Romano. Tampa Bay Times. Year after year, the numbers rise. They outpace population, capacity, and logic. The number of Florida residents brought to mental health facilities under the state's Baker Act has more than doubled since 2002, and there is no end in sight. Worse yet, the state's related tragedies have become impossible to ignore. John Chuck, involuntarily committed 27 times by his family's count, later drops his 5-year-old daughter off a bridge. A Marine Corps veteran is held under the Baker Act in July 2017 and, 1 month later, kills 2 Kissimmee police officers. And most recently, police say, 2 weeks after being examined during a Baker Act admission, a Tampa man deliberately ran down and killed a father riding bicycles with his 2 young sons. The question seems obvious: are flaws in the Baker Act at fault for these deaths? The answer is complicated, but at least this much is apparent: the system, said Pinellas Pasco public defender Bob Dillinger, is totally broken. What is the system? The Florida Mental Health Act, later known as the Baker Act in honor of Miami Representative Maxine Baker, who spent years pushing for the legislation, was passed by lawmakers to ensure people could not be held indefinitely at state institutions under the guise of mental health issues. From that perspective, the law has been an unquestioned success. Before then, people had been institutionalized for years without any hint of due process. At its most basic level, the Baker Act is an avenue for people who are deemed a risk to themselves or others to be held for as long as 72 hours for evaluation and help. From there, they can be released with instructions for follow-up care or transferred to a residential facility if a court finds it appropriate. I believe very strongly in the Baker Act, said Martha Lenderman, who was the state's Baker Act director in the 1990s and is considered the foremost expert on the law. It saves lives every single day. That is undoubtedly true. The problem is the Baker Act is only the first step. It is the mental health version of triage. An immediate, but temporary, solution to a more complex situation. In other words, the state has never come up with a comprehensive plan, or necessary funding, to take care of people once they leave what are, essentially, mental health emergency rooms. There is not intensive case management to make sure a patient keeps follow-up appointments with therapists, or takes medication, or doesn't revert right back into crisis after calming down for 72 hours. Preliminary research by the Baker Act Reporting Center at the University of South Florida indicates only about 10% of cases result in a hearing for involuntary placement. That would mean about 180,000 of every 200,000 cases are discharged within 72 hours. 3 days in a crisis stabilization unit does not solve the underlying problem, said Linda McKinnon, CEO of the Central Florida Behavioral Health Network. And nobody owns the responsibility of what happens to that person once they've been evaluated. And this is all exacerbated because the Baker Act has become a catch-all for community problems. Cops often use it to defuse a volatile situation even though a crime may not have occurred. Schools take advantage by having unruly students. Baker acted to keep their campus arrest numbers down. So what you have is more people entering the front door of the mental health system and fewer beds, money, and personnel to handle the flow. Especially on the back end. Florida's dangerous ground. At the time the Baker Act was passed in 1971, the director of the state's Mental Health Association warned that Florida was on dangerous ground because it was 41st in the U.S. in mental health funding. All these years later, most studies put Florida's spending at 49th, or even 50th, in the nation. You can't have a chronically underfunded program for years and years and years, and not see some of the tragedies we're seeing now, said Dillinger. If you talk to some providers, they'll tell you they need $250 million just to get to the level they were at in 2005. With the state virtually abdicating its role, local communities have been forced to step up. And that has led to efforts in Charlotte County and Northport, and now, a brand new PINELLAS program that began June. The PINELLAS Integrated Care Initiative is a joint venture between the county, the sheriff's office and numerous providers, along with a 3-year, $1.65 million grant from the nonprofit Foundation for a Healthy St. Petersburg. The premise is this: identify residents who may not yet rise to the level of criminal or psychotic behavior, and get them help before their situation worsens. The sheriff's office already has deputies with mental health training, and they will now be part of a team with licensed clinicians to handle appropriate cases. The idea is not to put people in jail or residential facilities, but also not to put them back on the street with no way to navigate their recovery. Right now, law enforcement over Baker Act's people, said PINELLAS Sheriff Bob Gualtieri. The reason is cops are problem solvers, that's what they do. So if someone is causing a problem and it meets the threshold of a Baker Act, they will take them in to de-escalate a situation. But the big hole in the system is that there is almost no case management available. You might be in crisis, but your crisis level is not drastic enough for you to be held longer than 72 hours, and it's usually less than that. So you end up walking out the door without someone navigating your treatment or even holding your hand. And in a lot of cases, those people just get worse and worse. So, is the Baker Act the problem? No, it plays a pivotal role in crisis situations. The problem is that the Baker Act is a bandage and not a solution. And advocates say that until a governor and legislature get serious about funding mental health programs, Florida will continue to see these tragic, and potentially avoidable, outcomes. Police use who may want to retaliate against him physically.
Hey Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County COPWATCH, and I just wanted you to know that I am using this stuff under fair use. And also remember to like and subscribe this channel. Also too, keep in mind I do not make any money on YouTube. This is 5 hours work a day, you know, fighting for freedom. And you can donate with PayPal and Patreon. I just want you to think about this. If everybody gives to PayPal and Patreon, Patreon is every month. Actually, PayPal you can do every month. I have 12,000 subscribers. If everybody gives, I can quit my regular job and go full-time investigations on Charlotte County and possibly even more and beyond. So just keep that in mind. If everybody helps out, I can go full-time doing this. Thanks.